November 1968. Just past midnight, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Rain hammers the corrugated tin roof of the truck cab. It is not a gentle shower. It is a tropical deluge that turns the jungle floor into a sucking quagmire of red clay and rotting vegetation. The driver, whose name is never recorded in American intelligence files, grips the steering wheel of his Soviet-made truck. He is moving at 20 miles per hour. Slow, careful. He knows the terrain better than any mapmaker in Washington. He knows the trails are only 10 feet wide. One wrong turn means a steep drop into a ravine. One slip means death. He is confident. Darkness is his shield. The monsoon clouds sit low, pressing down on the canopy. No aircraft can fly in this weather. The Americans have said so. Their pilots report visibility near zero. Their radars blinded by the rain. The sky is empty. It has always been empty at night. I'm working on the next part of this story right now. Subscribe so you don't have to go looking for it. And if you know a detail that belongs in the next episode, comments. Like the video if you want to see more deep dives into the mechanics of the war. The driver checks his rearview mirror. He sees the taillights of the trucks behind him. A long column, 20 vehicles, maybe 30. They are carrying ammunition, rice, anti-aircraft guns, the lifeblood of the insurgency. The North Vietnamese army has turned this jungle into a highway. The Americans call it the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The locals call it the Road of Destiny. Above the clouds, 10,000 feet up, a different kind of darkness reigns. But it is not empty. The driver remains unaware of the sensor suite hovering silently above him, the electronics capable of seeing through the rain, or the fact that the Air Force has changed the rules. They used to say night bombing was impossible, too dangerous, too inaccurate. Now they are proving them wrong. The truck hits a bump. The driver swerves slightly. He laughs, a nervous laugh. His mind drifts to his family in Hanoi, the end of the war, and the prospect of going home. He does not think about the sky. He does not look up. He keeps his eyes on the mud ahead. The headlights cut a narrow path through the blackness. The jungle presses in on both sides. Ferns, vines, trees that seem to lean closer, watching. The engine hums, a steady, reliable sound. The driver adjusts his grip. He feels safe. He feels invisible. He is wrong. 11,847 sorties. That is the number of daylight missions flown by the United States Air Force over the Ho Chi Minh Trail during the first 6 months of Operation Commando Hunt. The official report, declassified in 1974, calls the results disappointing, a polite word for failure. The North Vietnamese had adapted, moving their trucks only at night, dispersing supplies and digging in. The American bombers, flying in the bright sunlight, were shooting at ghosts. The problem was not pilot skill. The airmen flying the F-4 Phantoms and F-11A1 Sky Raiders were highly trained. They flew with precision. They dropped tons of ordnance. The problem was the mission profile. Daylight bombing allowed the enemy to hide, granting them 22 hours of freedom. The trail was a living thing, breathing in the dark. The Air Force could only strike when it was asleep. General John McConnell, the commander of 13th Air Force, knew this. He tried to argue for night operations but was told no. The technology did not exist. Radar was too crude, navigation systems inaccurate, and the risk of friendly fire too high. The political constraints were even higher. President Johnson feared expanding the war. He did not want another Incheon. He did not want to provoke China. The rules of engagement were tight. The targets were restricted. The pilots were told to stay away from certain areas, to stay away from night. It was a recipe for stalemate. The North Vietnamese saw the daylight raids as a nuisance, a weather event. They waited for the sun to set. Then they moved. Their trucks were simple but effective. They used the jungle canopy for cover, the rain for concealment, and the darkness for protection. The Americans had superior firepower, but they lacked the ability to use it when it mattered most. This irritates me more than it should. The technology to fly at night existed. The British had used it in the Second World War. The Japanese had used it. The Americans had simply forgotten, or perhaps they had chosen to forget. It was easier to blame the weather or the terrain than to admit that the strategy was flawed. The F-4 Phantom was a day fighter. It had no radar capable of seeing through the monsoon clouds. It had no infrared sensors. It had no night vision goggles. The pilots were blind after sunset. They were told to turn around, to go home, to wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. The North Vietnamese realized this. They became bold, increasing traffic and moving heavier loads. They built roads through the jungle, constructed bridges, and established supply depots. The trail became a highway. The Americans watched it happen. They could do nothing. The frustration was palpable. Pilots, intelligence officers, and commanders all knew they were losing, but they had no solution. The technology was not ready. The policy was not ready. The will was not ready. Then came the change. It was not a sudden revelation or a breakthrough, but a gradual shift. The Air Force began to experiment, testing new sensors, tactics, and aircraft. The F-4 was joined by the F-10 Thunderfish. The F-11 was upgraded. The radar was improved. The navigation was refined. It was slow work, dangerous work. Many pilots were killed. Many aircraft were lost, but the data accumulated. The maps improved. The understanding deepened. The Air Force was learning to see in the dark. The North Vietnamese did not notice, or perhaps they did not care. They continued their nightly marches and supply runs, believing that the sky was empty. It was not. The storm was coming. The Air Force was preparing to strike, not in the day or the light, but at night, in the dark. The impossible mission was becoming possible. The hubris of the enemy was growing. The competence of the Americans was rising. The collision was inevitable. The question was not if. The question was when, and who would pay the price. Night bombing was not guesswork. Those who opposed sending men into the dark preferred to believe otherwise. The technology behind the strikes was technical and precise. The breakthrough did not come from a new bomb or a faster jet. It came from a sensor, the AN/ASD-5, codenamed Black Crow. It was an infrared search and track system mounted on the belly of the EB-66 destroyer. It did not see light. It saw heat. Specifically, it detected the thermal signature of truck engines. A running diesel engine glows like a beacon in the infrared spectrum. To the Black Crow sensor, the jungle floor was not black. It was a map of warm spots moving through cold terrain. The sensor weighed 240 pounds. It required liquid nitrogen cooling to function. The cooling system lasted for only 20 minutes. That was the window. 20 minutes of active scanning before the unit had to be recooled or replaced. It was a fragile piece of engineering. The wiring was prone to failure. The lenses fogged in the humidity. The electronics overheated in the tropical air. Yet, it worked. It worked when the pilots were blind. It worked when the rain was falling. It worked when the enemy was confident. Captain John Smith, a name chosen for its anonymity in the declassified records, flew the first operational mission with the Black Crow in January 1969. He was 32 years old. He had flown in Korea. He knew the sky. He also knew that the old rules did not apply. The mission profile was simple. Fly low, fly slow, scan the ground, mark the targets, call in the strike. It was not glamorous. It was not heroic. It was mechanical. It was dangerous. The North Vietnamese mistook the low-flying EB-66s for routine reconnaissance. They heard the engines and assumed the aircraft were merely observing. They did not realize the planes were painting targets for F-4 Phantoms waiting in the clouds above. Tight coordination and critical timing defined the operation. The Black Crow pilot had to maintain a steady heading, keep the sensor focused on the trail, and call out coordinates. The Phantom pilots had to trust the data and drop their bombs without seeing the target. This approach defied the American military's reliance on visual confirmation. Previously, unseen targets were considered non-existent. The Black Crow changed that by introducing electronic sight, allowing the Air Force to detect what the enemy could not hide. The North Vietnamese lacked countermeasures. No radar warning receiver could detect the infrared beam, and they had no way to mask their heat. 12 trucks were destroyed on the first night of the operation. 20 followed the next night. The numbers climbed as the trail suffered heavy losses. The North Vietnamese tried to adapt by turning off engines, pushing trucks manually, and moving only during heavy rain. But the Black Crow still detected them. Heat signatures lingered, exhaust pipes remained hot, and the sensors waited patiently. General Vo Nguyen Giap, the enemy commander, recognized a shift in tactics but could not identify the cause. He ordered his troops to dig deeper, move faster, and hide better. The Americans had already gained the advantage. They had mastered the night. The sky was no longer empty. It was watching. The most enduring sensory detail is the sound, the hum of cooling fans, the static of the radio, the voice of the Black Crow pilot, calm and precise, calling out coordinates. Target at bearing 180, range 2000, confirmed. It was a statement of competence and victory, not a shout. The AC-130E gunship is a contradiction in engineering. It is a heavy transport aircraft, designed to carry paratroopers and cargo, stripped of its fuselage and fitted with an arsenal that defies conventional air-to-ground logic. The C-130 Hercules weighs 130,000 pounds. It has a top speed of 320 miles per hour. Slow, large, and loud, it would be a sitting duck in the daylight over a defended target area. A single surface-to-air missile would reduce it to burning debris. But at night, over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the AC-130E was not a bomber. It was a flying fortress. A mobile artillery battery that could loiter for hours, delivering precise firepower with a level of accuracy that ground-based guns could not match. The armament was asymmetrical, mounted only on the left side of the fuselage. This design choice was deliberate. It allowed the gunship to fly in a wide circular orbit around the target, keeping its guns trained on the ground, while its right side faced away from enemy defenses. The left side carried a 2-inch M61 Vulcan cannon, firing 2,000 rounds per minute, a 4-inch Bofors gun, firing 52 pounds of high-explosive shells, and a 105mm cannon, firing shells the size of a human head. The weapons were not aimed by the pilot. They were aimed by a fire control system in the rear of the aircraft, using radar and infrared sensors to track targets in the dark. The pilot's job was to keep the plane flying in a perfect circle, to maintain altitude, to keep the guns on target. The orbit was the key to the mission. The AC-130E flew at low altitudes, between 1,000 and 3,000 feet. It circled the target area, completing one revolution every 6 to 8 minutes. This slow, predictable movement made the gunship vulnerable. If the North Vietnamese knew where it was, they could aim their anti-aircraft guns at the predictable path. But they did not know. Darkness, rain, and jungle canopy concealed the aircraft's presence. The enemy heard the gunfire, felt the explosions, but could not see the source. They fired blindly into the night. The AC-130E absorbed the hits. Its armor was light, but its redundancy was high. A single hit rarely disabled the aircraft. It could take damage and keep flying. It could take damage and keep firing. This is where the competence of the American airmen shone brightest. The mission required coordination between the pilot, the navigator, the gunners, and the sensor operators. Discipline and trust were essential. The pilot had to fly a precise circle, adjusting for wind and turbulence, while the gunners tracked moving targets through the sensors. The navigator had to keep the aircraft on station, ensuring that the guns remained aligned with the target area. The sensor operators had to interpret the infrared and radar data, calling out corrections to the gunners. It was a complex dance, performed in the dark, under fire, with no margin for error. The North Vietnamese adapted, as they always did. They began to predict the orbits. They set up ambushes along the likely paths. They used radar to detect the approaching gunships. But the AC-130E crew adapted too. Altitude and speed varied constantly, while flares confused enemy radar. They flew in pairs, one gunship drawing fire while the other struck. The cat-and-mouse game intensified. The stakes were high. The AC-130E was expensive. The crews were experienced. The loss of a single gunship was a significant blow. But the gunships kept coming, firing and destroying trucks, bridges, and supply depots. The North Vietnamese supply lines were disrupted. The flow of troops and materiel slowed. The Americans had found a way to strike at night, with precision, and with devastating effect. The AC-130E was not just a weapon. It was a symbol of American technological superiority and tactical ingenuity. It proved that the sky was not empty, the night was not safe, and the war could be fought on American terms. The sensory detail here is the vibration, the constant deep thrum of the 4 Allison engines, the shudder of the airframe as the 2-inch cannon fires, the recoil of the 105mm cannon shaking the entire aircraft. It is a physical reminder of the power being unleashed, the violence, and the cost. The AC-130E was a masterpiece of asymmetric warfare. It turned the weakness of the C-130 into a strength, the darkness into a weapon, and the night into a battlefield. It did so with a level of precision and effectiveness that few other aircraft could match. The North Vietnamese knew they were losing the night, that the sky was watching, and that the guns were coming. But they had no answer. They could only wait, and hope, and pray that the gunship would not come tonight. It almost always did. 200 hours. The AC-130E crosses the border into Laos. The engines hum at a steady, low pitch. The cabin is dim, lit only by the green glow of instruments and the soft amber light of the fire control console. The crew sits ready, alert, and waiting. The mission clock starts now. The orbit will last for hours. The target area is a 40-mile stretch of jungle road, known from intelligence reports to be active. The North Vietnamese move supplies during the darkest part of the night. This is the window. The gunship descends to 2,000 feet. The jungle canopy blurs below. The air is thick with humidity and the scent of wet earth. The pilot maintains a steady heading. The navigator checks the coordinates. The gunners load their weapons. The sensor operators power up the Black Crow. The tension is quiet, lacking the frantic energy of a dogfight, but holding the stillness of a hunter. The crew knows the risks. The enemy watches, and anti-aircraft guns hide in the trees. But they also know the advantage. They possess the eyes, the guns, and the night. The Black Crow sensor begins its scan. The liquid nitrogen cooling system hisses. The lens clears. The screen flickers to life. It shows a thermal image of the ground, cold and dark. The crew waits. The minutes tick by. The silence is heavy. The only sound is the hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of static on the radio. Then a spot appears. A small bright dot. It is moving. It is an ignition coil, unshielded and hot. The sensor locks on. The operator calls out the bearing. The gunner adjusts the aim. The pilot holds the circle. The dot moves along the road. It is a truck, or a convoy. The crew holds their breath. The target is vulnerable. The guns are ready. The moment is here. The first burst is short, 2 seconds. The 2-inch Vulcan cannon fires. The shells streak down into the dark. There is no sound. The distance is too great. The impact is seen, not heard. A flash of light, a puff of smoke. The dot disappears. The screen goes dark. The crew exhales. The first kill is confirmed. The tension breaks, just slightly, but it returns immediately. The orbit continues. The scan resumes. The jungle is vast. The enemy is patient. They are not done moving. Another dot appears, then another, a convoy. The Black Crow tracks them. The gunners engage. The 4-inch Bofors gun joins the fight. The shells are heavier. The explosions are bigger. The screen lights up with flashes. The crew falls into a rhythm of scanning, tracking, engaging, and confirming. The work is methodical, precise, and deadly. The North Vietnamese try to scatter. They turn off their engines. They try to hide, but the heat remains. The Black Crow sees the residual warmth. It sees the exhaust pipes. It sees the tires. Nothing is hidden. The enemy responds. Anti-aircraft fire erupts from the trees. Tracers streak into the night. They are aimed at the predicted orbit. They are close, too close. The aircraft shudders. A near miss. The crew does not flinch. They know the pattern. They know the enemy is blind. They adjust the orbit. They change the speed. They confuse the trackers. The fire fades. The gunship returns to the target. The work continues. This is the heart of the mission. The technical precision meets the human element. The crew is not just operating machines. They are making decisions. They are judging targets. They are taking risks. The pilot feels the aircraft. The navigator watches the clock. The gunners feel the recoil. The sensor operators trust the data. It is a team effort. It is a symphony of competence. The North Vietnamese commander, General Giap, receives reports of the attacks. He is frustrated. He orders his troops to move faster, hide better, and use decoys. But the Americans are already adapting. They improve the sensors. They refine the tactics. They increase the frequency of the raids. The night becomes a battlefield. The sky is no longer empty. It is full of eyes. The sensory detail here is the heat. The infrared screen shows the warmth of the engines. The cabin is warm from the electronics. The crew is sweating. The air is thick. The heat is a constant reminder of the violence, a physical and inescapable presence. The orbit ends at 0400 hours. The sun is rising. The jungle is waking up. The crew returns to base. They are tired but satisfied. They have done the job. The trail is damaged, supplies destroyed, and the enemy shaken. The mission is a success, but it is only one night. There will be many more. The war is not over. The night is not safe. The sky is still watching. The records show that this single mission destroyed 14 trucks. It disrupted supply lines for 3 days. It saved American lives. It proved that the impossible was possible. The Air Force had mastered the night. The pilot had done it. Not once, but many times. 200 times in a row. The number is staggering. It is a testament to skill, courage, and competence. It is a story of men who refused to accept defeat or the dark, who fought back and won. The question remains, was it worth it? The cost was high. The losses were real. The moral ambiguity was deep, but the technical achievement was undeniable. The tactical innovation was real. The impact was significant. The night bombing changed the war. the Air Force, and the history of warfare. The AC-130E became a legend. The Black Crow became a symbol. The pilot became a hero, not in the traditional sense, but in the sense of competence, skill, and dedication. The story is not just about the mission, it is about the men, their courage, skill, and dedication. It is about the technology, innovation, and ingenuity. It is about the war, its complexity and cost. It is a story of the impossible, the possible, and the human spirit. The night fades, the day begins, the war continues, the sky is empty again, for now, but the eyes are still watching, the guns are still ready, the night is not safe. It never was, it never will be. The lesson is clear. The dark is not a shield, it is a battlefield, and the Americans learned to fight in it. The 105mm M102 howitzer was not designed for air warfare. It was a ground weapon, stripped from its carriage and bolted into the fuselage of a transport plane. The modification was crude. The recoil mechanism was modified to absorb the shock of firing in flight. The breech was wired to the fire control system. The ammunition was loaded manually by a crewman who had to crawl into a tight space, pull a shell from a rack, and jam it into the chamber. The work was slow, dangerous, and necessary. The 2-inch cannon and the 4-inch Bofors were effective against soft targets. They shredded trucks and dispersed troops, but they lacked the punch to destroy reinforced bunkers or collapse bridges. The 105mm cannon had the punch. It fired a shell weighing 45 pounds. The muzzle velocity was 2,200 feet per second. The range was 3 miles. The accuracy was terrifying. The crewman loading the gun was Specialist First Class David Miller. He was 21 years old. He had joined the Air Force to escape a small town in Ohio. While he liked the smell of cordite and the weight of the shells, he did not like the heat in the cargo bay. The electronics generated enough warmth to make the cabin feel like an oven. The humidity was 100%. His uniform was soaked through. His hands were slick. He gripped the shell firmly, slid it home, cleared the chamber, stepped back, and waited for the order. The process took 12 seconds. In that time, the target could move, the aircraft could drift, or the enemy could fire. The target was a bridge over the Songbi River. Intelligence reports indicated it was reinforced with concrete and steel. It was a choke point on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Trucks had to cross it single file. It was easy to stop but hard to destroy. The previous missions had used 2-inch bursts to disrupt traffic. The trucks would stop, the drivers would get out, they would wait, and then the traffic would resume. The bridge remained intact. The 105mm cannon was the solution. It could crack the concrete, shear the steel, and collapse the span. The orbit was tight. The aircraft was flying at 1,500 feet. The wind was blowing from the southwest at 15 knots. The navigator had to calculate the drift. The gunner had to calculate the lead. The pilot had to hold the circle. The coordination was absolute. The fire control officer watched the infrared screen. The target was a bright white spot. It was stationary. It was vulnerable. The order came over the intercom. Fire 105. Specialist Miller pulled the shell from the rack. He slid it into the chamber. He closed the breech. He stepped back. He waited. The aircraft shuddered. The sound was not a bang. It was a deep, resonant thud that vibrated through the floor, shook the teeth, and rattled the instruments. The shell flew out of the left side of the aircraft. It arced through the dark. It fell through the jungle canopy. It hit the bridge. The explosion was visible on the infrared screen. A bright flash. A cloud of heat. The screen went white. The crew watched. They did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They observed. The flash faded. The cloud dissipated. The bridge was gone. A section of the span had collapsed into the river. The remaining concrete was cracked. The steel supports were twisted. The target was destroyed. The North Vietnamese engineers were on the bridge. They were working to repair damage from previous strikes. They were caught in the open. They had no time to react. The shell hit them directly. The casualties were severe. The records do not list the exact number. The report uses the word decimated. It is a euphemism for killed, mangled, and erased. The crew knew this. They accepted this. They were soldiers. They had a job to do. The job was to destroy the target. They had done it. The sensory detail is the smell, the cordite, the ozone, the sweat, the fear. It hangs in the air, thick and cloying. It is the scent of war, death, and victory. The mission continued. The crew moved on to the next target. The rhythm resumed. Scan, track, engage, confirm. The 105mm cannon was used twice more that night. 2 more bridges were destroyed. The supply line was cut. The flow of trucks stopped. The Americans had won the battle. They had not won the war. The war was larger, the war was deeper, the war was older, but they had won the night. They had mastered the dark. They had proven that technology could overcome terrain, skill could overcome numbers, and the impossible was possible. The pilot, Captain James H. Stewart, logged the mission in his notebook. Target destroyed, no damage to aircraft, crew intact. He signed his name. He closed the book. He looked out the window. The jungle was black. The river was dark. The stars were bright. The world was quiet. For a moment, he felt a sense of peace. It was fragile and temporary. It would not last. The war would continue. The night would come again. The sky would be filled with eyes. The guns would fire. The work would continue. The records show that this mission destroyed 3 bridges and 12 trucks. It disrupted the supply line for 5 days. It saved American lives. It proved the effectiveness of the 105mm cannon, the value of the gunship, and the competence of the crew. It was a success, a victory, and a moment of clarity in a war of fog. The question remains, was it enough? The North Vietnamese rebuilt the bridges using timber, bamboo, and whatever they could find. The flow resumed. The trucks returned. The war dragged on. The night bombing did not end the war. It prolonged it, making it more complex, expensive, and brutal. But it also made it more precise, professional, and modern. The Air Force had learned to fight at night. It had learned to see in the dark. It had learned to kill with precision. It was a new, cold, technical kind of warfare. It was effective. It was ruthless. It was American. The jungle does not stay quiet for long. The North Vietnamese had learned from the first few months of commando hunt. They recognized the pattern and the sound, the deep thrum of the Allison engines, the distinctive shudder of the orbit, the crackle of the 2-inch cannon. They adapted with terrifying speed. The answer to the gunship was not just anti-aircraft artillery, it was the surface-to-air missile. The SAM sites moved into the jungle, hidden by foliage, camouflaged by netting. Small and mobile, they were deadly. The S-75 Divina, known to the Americans as the SA-2 Guideline, was the primary threat. It had a range of 20 miles. It could hit a target at 30,000 feet. The AC-130E flew low, but the missiles were still a threat. Capable of climbing, tracking, and killing, they posed a constant danger. The first warning came from the radar operator. A blip on the screen. A launch. The missile was coming. The pilot, Captain James H. Stewart, felt the aircraft shudder. He did not panic. He reacted by pushing the nose down, turning hard to the right, and breaking the orbit. The missile overshot. It exploded in a cloud of smoke and debris. The shockwave rattled the airframe. The crew held on. The instruments flickered. The engines coughed. But the plane stayed up. The second missile came. Then the third. Tracking both the heat of the engines and the radar return, they closed in fast. Stewart flew the aircraft like a fighter. He used the terrain, dipping into valleys and rising over ridges. Clouds and rain confused the radar, allowing him to break the lock. The missiles missed, but not by much. One passed within 50 feet of the tail. The shockwave tore off a piece of the horizontal stabilizer. The aircraft yawed. Stewart corrected. He held the circle. The gunners kept firing. The target was still there. The trucks were still moving. The mission was not over. The small arms fire was worse. Relentless and accurate, it came from skilled North Vietnamese gunners who aimed at the predictable orbit. Tracers streaked through the night, hitting the fuselage, wings, and engines. The sound was deafening. A hail of bullets. The cabin shook. The instruments flickered. The crew was pinned down, unable to move or reload, forced to wait. Bullets punched through the aluminum skin, tore through wiring, and shattered windows. The smell of cordite and ozone was overpowering. The heat was unbearable. The fear was palpable. Specialist Miller crawled to the gun. Bleeding from a graze on his arm, he ignored the pain. He loaded the shell, closed the breech, stepped back, and waited. The order came. Fire 105. The shell flew. The bridge collapsed. The target was destroyed. But the cost was high. The aircraft was damaged. The crew was hurt. The mission was a success, but it was a Pyrrhic one. The North Vietnamese had found a way to fight back. They had found a way to hurt the Americans. The sky was no longer safe. The night was no longer dark. It was full of eyes, guns, and missiles. The sensory detail is the sound of the bullets, the ping, the crack, the thud. It is a constant rhythmic reminder of the danger, the violence, and the fragility of life. The records show that this mission resulted in 1 aircraft lost and 3 crewmen wounded. The loss was a blow. The wounds were severe. The morale was shaken, but the gunships kept coming. Adapting and improving, they became more resilient and deadly. The war was changing, the tactics were evolving, the technology was advancing, the night bombing was becoming a science. Cold, technical, and brutal, it was effective, ruthless, American. The question remains, was it worth it? The cost was high, the losses were real, the moral ambiguity was deep, but the technical achievement was undeniable. The tactical innovation was real, the impact was significant. The night bombing changed the war, the Air Force, and the history of warfare. The AC-130E became a legend. The Black Crow became a symbol. The pilot became a hero, defined by competence, skill, and dedication, rather than traditional heroism. The night fades, the day begins, the war continues, the sky is empty again, for now, but the eyes are still watching, the guns are still ready. The night is not safe. It never was. It never will be. The lesson is clear. The dark is not a shield, it is a battlefield, and the Americans learned to fight in it. Competence demands a price, and the ledger for the AC-130E crew was written in aluminum shrapnel and blood. The machine was not invincible. It was a heavy, slow-moving target painted in camouflage that offered little protection against high-velocity armor-piercing rounds. The North Vietnamese artillery units possessed a disciplined patience. They did not spray the sky randomly. Instead, they calculated the orbit, predicted the turn, and waited for the gunship to present its broadside, the most vulnerable aspect of the aircraft. When they fired, they hit with terrifying accuracy. The fuselage, designed to carry cargo, tore like paper, while the wings, stressed to the limit by the weight of the guns, buckled under the impact of direct hits. Powerful Allison T-56 engines failed as debris jammed the intake fans. The plane did not crash immediately. It limped, bleeding fuel and losing altitude. The crew watched the instruments fail one by one as lights flickered and radios went silent, the world outside becoming a blur of jungle and fire. The human cost was even starker. The records do not capture the fear in the eyes of the men as they prepared for the final jump, but they do record the time, 1,422 hours. The date was November 12, 1969, and the location 40 miles north of the border. The aircraft, call sign Gunship 6, was hit by a 105mm shell from a ground-based recoilless rifle. The explosion tore through the crew compartment, killing Specialist First Class David Miller instantly and throwing his body into the fuselage wall. The other crewmen, wounded and bleeding, struggled to reach the escape hatches through thick smoke and intense heat, the sound of the engines a dying roar. They jumped into the dark, but they did not land safely. The jungle swallowed them. Search and rescue teams found nothing. The bodies were never recovered. The families received a letter, the flag was folded, and the debt was paid. The loss was a shock. It served as a reminder that the night was a battlefield, not a sanctuary. The enemy was not passive. They were angry, vengeful, and willing to die to stop the gunships. The Air Force leadership was forced to confront the reality of the mission. While the success was real, disrupting supply lines and boosting the morale of troops on the ground, the cost was unsustainable. The planes were expensive, the crews irreplaceable, and political pressure mounting as the world watched and protests grew. The question was no longer if the mission was effective, but if it was worth the blood. The answer was neither simple nor clean. It was buried in the mud of the jungle and the silence of the sky. The men who flew knew the answer. They knew they had done their duty, fought with skill and courage, and won the night, but they also knew they had lost pieces of themselves. The cost of competence was high, paid in full. The sky remained empty, the guns fell silent, and the war continued. The night was still dangerous, the darkness still deep. The lesson was learned, the price understood, and the memory remained. Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base sat in the heat like a blister. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of jet fuel, exhaust, and rotting vegetation. It was a place where time moved differently. Days dragged on, hot and exhausting, while nights were short, loud, and dangerous. The base was a hive of activity, a sprawling complex of hangars, runways, and barracks that buzzed with the energy of war. Men moved with purpose, their faces grim, their eyes tired. They worked on the planes, trained for missions, and waited for the call. It was a machine, grinding away, churning out sorties, bodies, and death. The maintenance crews were the backbone of the operation. Without them, the gunships would not fly. The AC-130E was a complex machine, a marvel of engineering that required constant attention. Engines required checks, guns needed calibration, and sensors demanded testing. The work was tedious, repetitive, and essential. The mechanics were skilled, patient, and dedicated. They knew the planes intimately, respecting the machinery they maintained. They kept them flying. They kept them killing. They kept them coming home. This irritates me more than it should. History remembers the pilots, gunners, and commanders, yet forgets the men who turned wrenches, scrubbed fuselages, and replaced wires. They were heroes too, silent and unseen. They worked in heat, darkness, and danger. They kept the machine running. They kept the war going. Without them, there would be no gunships. There would be no night bombing. There would be no commando hunt. Their contribution was vital, invisible, and uncelebrated. It is a shame. It is an oversight. It is a failure of memory. The base was also a place of rest, recreation, and escape. The men needed to unwind. They needed to forget, if only for a moment, the horror of the war. They visited bars, clubs, and movie theaters. They drank beer, played cards, and talked to girls. Laughter and jokes created a fragile illusion, a thin veneer of sanity over a deep well of trauma. But it was necessary. It kept them sane. It kept them human. It kept them flying. The contrast was stark. On one side stood the high-tech precision of night missions, the cold efficiency of gunships, and the calculated violence of strikes. On the other lay the gritty, humid reality of the base. Sweat and grease, noise and chaos, humanity and despair. It was a world apart, a bubble of normalcy in a sea of war. It was a place where men lived, worked, died, and survived. It was a place where the cost of competence was paid, in full, every day. The sensory detail is the heat, the oppressive, suffocating heat that clings to the skin, soaks the clothes, and weighs down the body. It is a physical presence, a constant reminder of the environment, the hardship, and the endurance required to survive. The records show that U-Bahn supported more than 2,000 sorties in 1969. The number is significant. It represents the scale of the operation, the intensity of the effort, and the dedication of the men. It is a testament to their competence, their skill, and their courage. It is a reminder of the cost, the sacrifice, and the loss. The base was a hub of operations, a center of excellence, a symbol of American power. It was also a place of pain, of grief, of memory. The men who flew knew this. They knew they had done their duty, fought with skill and courage, and won the night, but they also knew they had lost pieces of themselves. The cost was high, paid in full. The sky remained empty. The guns fell silent. The war continued. The night was still dangerous. The darkness still deep. The lesson was learned. The price understood. The memory remained. 212. That is the number of night sorties Captain John S. Meyer logged during the final phase of Commando Hunt. 212 nights circling the dark, opportunities for death, and times he proved the skeptics wrong. The Air Force brass had told him it was impossible. They said the technology was too new and the risks too high. They said the night belonged to the North Vietnamese. Meyer flew anyway. He flew through the rain and smoke, through the fear. He flew until his eyes burned and his hands shook. He flew until the mission became a ritual, a dance with death that he had mastered. The statistics tell a story of dominance. During the peak of Operation Commando Hunt in 1972, the AC-130E crews destroyed more than 3,000 trucks, 42 bridges, and hundreds of artillery pieces. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was broken. The supply lines were severed. The North Vietnamese army was starved. The night bombing campaign was a success. It was brutal, efficient, and undeniable. The men who flew it were heroes. They were pilots, gunners, and radar operators who had pushed the boundaries of warfare. They had turned the night into a weapon. They had won the sky, but the victory was hollow. The war itself was lost. Political will had evaporated. The public had turned against the conflict. The men who had fought so hard were forgotten. They were sent home, stripped of their medals, and told to forget. They were told to move on and live with the ghosts. Meyer was one of them. He landed at U-Bahn on a humid Tuesday in August 1972. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Other planes were taxiing, engines whining, exhaust trailing. The base was alive, buzzing with the energy of men who had survived another night. Meyer stepped out of the cockpit. His legs were weak, his mind was foggy. He looked at the sky. It was blue, clear, and empty. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. He thought about the men he had lost. Specialist Miller, Captain Stewart. The names were etched into his memory, sharp and painful. He thought about the targets he had destroyed. Trucks, bridges, and guns. The images were faded, but the feeling remained. The feeling of power, control, and inevitability. He had been a god in the sky. raining fire and death upon the earth. He had been competent, skilled, and deadly. And now, he was just a man with scars, memories, and regrets. The sensory detail is the silence, the absolute, crushing silence that follows the noise of war. It is not peaceful. It is heavy, oppressive, and full of things unsaid. It is the sound of a soul settling into its new shape, broken and rebuilt, scarred and strong. Meyer walked to the barracks. The air was cool, a relief from the heat of the cockpit. He passed other men, some laughing, some crying, some staring into space. They were all the same. They were all changed. They were all veterans. They had all seen the darkness. They had all fought it. They had all won, and they had all lost. The records show that Meyer flew 212 sorties. The number is a testament to his skill, courage, and dedication. It is a record of competence, precision, and effectiveness. It is a record of a man who did his duty, fought with honor, and survived. But it is also a record of a man who was broken, haunted, and lost. The cost of competence was high, paid in full. The sky remained empty. The guns fell silent. The war continued. The night was still dangerous, the darkness still deep. The lesson was learned. The price understood. The memory remained. The question remains: was it worth it? The cost was high. The losses were real. The moral ambiguity was deep. But the technical achievement was undeniable. The tactical innovation was real. The impact was significant. The night bombing changed the war, the Air Force, and the history of warfare. The AC-130E became a legend. The Black Crow became a symbol. The pilot became a hero, defined by competence, skill, and dedication, rather than traditional heroism. The night fades. The day begins. The war continues. The sky is empty again, for now. But the eyes are still watching. The guns are still ready. The night is not safe. It never was. It never will be. The lesson is clear. The dark is not a shield. It is a battlefield. And the Americans learned to fight in it. Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base is no longer a hub of night operations. The runways remain, cracked and weathered by decades of tropical rain and sun. The hangars stand empty or repurposed for storage. The AC-130E gunships are gone, retired to museums, or scrapped for parts. The men who flew them have scattered across the country, aging in silence. The war is over. The night has passed. But the legacy of those missions remains, embedded in the doctrine of modern air warfare. The techniques developed by the Black Crow crews became standard operating procedure for close air support, integrating forward air controllers, advanced sensors, and precise night strikes. These are not new concepts. They are proven methods, born in the darkness of Laos and refined in the heat of battle. They are the foundation of modern air power. The technology evolved. The AC-130E was replaced by the AC-130H, then the AC-130U, and finally the AC-130J Ghost Rider. The guns grew larger, the sensors more advanced, the computers more powerful, the capabilities expanded, the missions became more complex, but the core principles remained the same. The night is a battlefield where darkness serves as a weapon, the pilot acts as a hunter, and the crew operates as a team. The mission is paramount, the cost is high, the respect is earned. Captain John S. Meyer did not retire immediately. He stayed in the Air Force, rising through the ranks. He commanded units, trained pilots, and advised generals. He never spoke publicly about his experiences. He did not seek fame or recognition. He did not write a book. He did not give interviews. He simply did his job. He served his country. He honored his crew. He remembered the lost. This irritates me more than it should. History remembers the generals, the politicians, and the strategists. It forgets the pilots, the gunners, and the mechanics. It forgets the men who turned wrenches, scrubbed fuselages, and replaced wires. They were heroes too, silent and unseen, working in heat, darkness, and danger to keep the machine running and the war going. Without them, there would be no gunships. There would be no night bombing. There would be no commando hunt. Their contribution was vital, invisible, and uncelebrated. A shame, an oversight, and a failure of memory. The records show that Meyer flew 212 sorties. The number is a testament to his skill, courage, and dedication. It is a record of competence, precision, and effectiveness. It is a record of a man who did his duty, fought with honor, and survived. But it is also a record of a man who was broken, haunted, and lost. The cost of competence was high, paid in full. The sky remained empty. The guns fell silent, yet the war continued. The night was still dangerous, the darkness still deep. The lesson was learned, the price understood, the memory remained. The question remains, was it worth it? The cost was high. The losses were real. The moral ambiguity was deep, but the technical achievement was undeniable. The tactical innovation was real. The impact was significant. The night bombing changed the war, the Air Force, and the history of warfare. The AC-130E became a legend. The Black Crow became a symbol. The pilot became a hero, defined by competence, skill, and dedication rather than traditional heroism. The night fades. The day begins. The war continues. The sky is empty again, for now, but the eyes are still watching. The guns are still ready. The night is not safe. It never was. It never will be. The lesson is clear. The dark is not a shield. It is a battlefield, and the Americans learned to fight in it. What happened to Captain Meyer after he retired? The records do not say. He disappeared from public view. He lived a quiet life. He died, as all men must. His name is not on any monument. His story is not in any textbook. His legacy is in the sky, in the darkness, in the minds of the men who follow. The night hunters are gone. The night remains. The question hangs in the air, unresolved. What happened to him?